My name is Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Ethan Mermel. You've seen my contact via email regarding registration for this webinar. We're super happy to have you all on here and really happy to have both Ruby Ward and Sharon Ketch as speakers. And we have the Southwest Center Program Manager, Tracy Celio, here joining us. So as the title says, as you signed up for, this webinar will be focused on grant writing for small and mid-sized farms and food businesses. So it's really going to get into the more logistics side, inside of the more pre-planning processes of grant writing. And hopefully this helps you all in terms of finding grants and the whole process of grant writing. I know sometimes people might feel that there's a bit overwhelming and there's just a lot of variables. So really trying to streamline the grant writing process through this webinar. So a couple logistics before we get started. Oh, we got a raised hand. 1 second, Felix, I'll get right to you. Thank you. So this webinar, it is going to be recorded and it will be posted on the Southwest Center website, which you can see the link for right there. And also this one, we are going to translate it and we're going to have the slides in both English and Spanish. This time we're going to send it out after the webinar. So you'll get an email following this webinar with the PowerPoint presentation. And we will have questions. We encourage you all to turn your cameras on and raise your hand. We do questions at the end. So we please ask, you can get engaged in the chat. We'll be there to answer questions in the chat and share resources with one another. Just really want to make this engaging and more of a, meeting each other face-to-face kind of format as much as possible. And like I said previously, there's going to be time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you can save those questions after the presenters give their presentation, that'll be at the end of the webinar. And we are very thankful to have Aaron with Globally You through Alba. Our partners Alba are doing like huge favor for us. We're able to translate this slide and these presentations. So the instructions for that in Spanish are in the chat. If you're looking for interpretation, we have Aaron who's going to be live translating this webinar in Spanish. So really grateful to have Aaron and super thankful for Alba. All right, Tracy, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Okay, I just want to double check, Felix and others, are you able to use the icon for Spanish translation? Aaron, are you good to go? Fabulous. Okay, well, welcome to our September webinar. We are the Southwest Regional Food Business Center, and my name is Tracy Celio. I have the pleasure of being with UC Agriculture and Natural Resources and the program manager for the Southwest Center. And we're one of 12 regional food business centers that were established by the USDA back in 2023. And we're really focused on small farmers and food businesses across the nation. And the goal is to build a more resilient and sustainable and local food system. Unfortunately, our program was defunded by the federal government back in July, and we will be doing programming up until September 15th. And then we are going to be looking at a new iteration of ourselves, but we're really excited to continue to deliver excellent services for the public. So what do? We have 3 pillars. One is capacity building, and that is financial grants or awards to direct to producers, fisher folk, agriculture, food entrepreneurs, and everyone that works along the supply chain. We're excited that just yesterday we had a press release go out, and 73 farm and food businesses across the Southwest were funded through our work. We're excited to look forward to more of that in the future. The second thing we do is technical assistance. So we train small farm and food businesses on those things around business acumen, things like how to access grants, like we're here today to do, how to do your marketing, and some of those more nuanced, more challenging business areas for food and farm businesses. And then last, we coordinate across programs. So we coordinate with our state departments of agriculture, with our university extension partners, and with all of the community-based organizations across our region. We serve Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah. Next slide. And I should say, please join our newsletter. We'll put a link in the chat to our website, and you can give us your email and we will send you a quarterly newsletter. Thanks, Navreet. So let's jump into what we're here for today. Many small businesses, but especially agricultural businesses, need funding to access new markets. And so we're talking about entry to grant writing. So this is a very basic course, and we're going to give you some ideas on best practices and then where to go for some of those opportunities. We'll be feeding some things into chat today where you might look, because some of the best grants for small businesses might be in your local community. So small community foundations, maybe your state department of ag, maybe your county website, but there are resources at your local level that we're really advocating that you look for. So we're going to start with an introduction of our speakers, and we have Ruby Ward. Ruby is a professor in the Department of Applied Economics at Utah State University. She was raised on a farm and ranch in southern Idaho and has delivered educational programs in Utah and the surrounding region for the last 26 years. She's the co-chair of the National Farm Income and Tax Extension Committee and oversees ruraltax.org, an award-winning website for farm and tax information, and she's co-chaired an urban and small farms conference for the last 12 years. She's received 1 national and 3 regional and 5 state-level awards for extension programs. We're thrilled today to have Ruby with us. Next slide, we have Sharon Check, who is the program director at the Urban and Environmental Policy Institute at Occidental College in Los Angeles. For over a decade, her work is focused on achieving more equitable, sustainable, and nourishing local food systems in the Los Angeles region through project work in urban agriculture, farmers markets, and farm to school. Sharon is the LA sub-region lead for the Southwest Regional Food Business Center and co-lead for our evaluation team within the center. She brings an extensive experience in federal and state grant writing, management, evaluation, and coordination of regional partnerships. Sharon is a member of the Los Angeles County Food Equity Roundtable, and as an LA County Master Gardener, co-leads the Master Gardener School Garden Network. As an adjunct professor at Occidental College, she teaches several community-engaged courses exploring the topics of food systems, food justice, and sustainability. With that introduction, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker, and that is Ruby Ward. Thank you both for being with us. I should also say both of these excellent speakers are on our center management team, and we're thrilled to have them here today. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Tracy. So I get the privilege of going over some of the basics this morning, and it's kind of a melting pot of just a lot of things that I think it's really good to know when you're getting serious about writing grants. And so next slide, please. So what I'm going to go over is where to find some grant opportunities. And this is not an exhaustive list. We're just kind of highlighting things, how to prepare to apply. So some of those steps you need to take before you actually apply. I'm going to go through an example after that in that section, and then lessons learned, just things that in my experience, both from writing grants, overseeing them, and also then being a reviewer on grants, some of the lessons that I've learned over the years. The potential tax consequences of a grant if you're a successful recipient, and then some of the other resources that aren't necessarily grant related, but I think might be helpful for some of the adjacent issues. So next slide, how to find grant opportunities. One of the great things is the Southwest Food Business website. And so I've got that there, and under resources, there's a lot of information there. Another good resource is your state departments of agriculture, and several of them may have a newsletter, and Utah State has a great newsletter, and so I'm going to go ahead and put their a link to how to sign up for their newsletter in the chat, so you'll have that. And if anybody else has other links, go ahead and put those in the chat too. And then extension programs. So I work at Utah State University in the extension program. And as was mentioned in the bio, I co-chair an urban and small farms conference. And from there, we developed a listserv for urban and small farms programs. And so several times, people may have like a grant opportunity or another opportunity for producers. And a lot of times they'll send those to me or somebody else involved with the list, and then we'll send that out. So we use the listserv not just for the conference, but for several other things. And I think just about every extension program in probably every state, but for sure in the West, has some type of a listserv or some type of contacts. You also should have a local county extension office. And so if you're unsure about what to do, sometimes just walking into that office and then just asking, just saying, I haven't worked with extension in the past, what are some of the programs that you have here in the county? And can I get on any newsletters or something else? Because then that information might come out to you also. State and local departments, not just the Department of Agriculture, but there might be other departments within your state and local government that have grant opportunities. And I've got some for Utah, and I'll post those in the chat. And these are some great ones. So for Utah, they include the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget and the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity Grants page. I also included the Southwest Food Business Center resource page just as a link. So instead of it just being there on the website. And then the Utah Microloan Small Business resource page. And so those are all some of the great ones. Every state should have some of those. And sometimes you might have to do a little bit of checking and stuff to find those, but over time you will. And then social media pages. And I don't have an example here, but I know like there might be like homesteader ones, Facebook sites for your state. Slow food is another one that a lot of times is there. I have no idea what is the cap on the microloan fund. So you'll just have to, I think, look in there. And then one that I have not used, but has become, that came highly recommended to me is the Ambrock Funding Library. And so this is one that should be a collection of different types of funding resources. And so you can go into there and also search around. But overall, a lot of the, I guess, commonality amongst these resources that I've listed in particular is just really becoming more networked. And so having more information about what the extension programs are in your area, your state Department of Agriculture, groups of people that are in the same space, what is this with the small farm, direct marketing, all of those other types of things. A lot of times just being part of those groups and that networking can help you find out about opportunities, not just for grants, but for educational resources, other things. And then the Southwest Food Business Center is a good collection of those resources. And so that's, and if people have other options or things that they can do, please feel free to, again, put those in the chat. So is my audio going okay, or do I need to adjust something?
Your audio is good. Thank you, Ruby.
All right, okay. All right, next slide, please. Oh, so we are already here. Okay. So now that you kind of know where to find grants, now we're going to switch to preparing to apply. And this is kind of the pre-prep. So even without kind of a particular grant, these are some of the things to just be aware of. Know where you want to take your food business with or without grants. I think this is sometimes not thought of, and I think it's one of the most important things because your business should not be a slave to the grant, but the grant should be an enhancement to the business. And so I've seen different organizations and also businesses that sometimes will chase a grant. And so they modify what they're doing with their business or their organization to chase that grant. And and because of that, they're kind of bouncing all over and don't really head in the direction that they want to head. And so really kind of think about where you want to go, what you want to do, and then ask what types of funds do we need how much funds do we need when? What do we need them for? What's our overall goal, or what do we want to accomplish with them? And above all, be realistic. And so this is really, I had somebody else that I was just kind of touching base with a few different people about some potential things to think about, or, get their take on this. And one said that sometimes she gets requests like, I want to start a regenerative farm in Utah, but don't have land, animals, equipment. I live in Texas. I will also need a place to live, preferably by the water. And do you have grants for all of that? And so it really isn't a realistic ask, right? They don't know really what they want to do. They don't know, you know what I mean? And so sometimes you need to kind of take a step back and kind of say, what is realistic? And it may be that once you do this and have your business, and then once you figure out where you want to be, then put that together in a more formalized way as a business plan. So then that keeps you and everybody else aware that might be working with you. This is where I'm headed. This is what I want to do. Another preparation stage might be to have some tax ID numbers. And so this would be, you might have an employee identification number or an EIN. There may be some other types of things that you have, but you basically have to have everything in place. And so with the example that I was just talking about with the person saying that I have all this, they haven't necessarily thought about I have an actual business. They're just looking for, they have a dream. But the first step before actually looking for grants is saying, putting specifics to that dream and then realistic, make it be realistic. So next slide. And so once you kind of know where your business is headed and what you're doing, then you can actually look at what's called a request for application. So when you find like a grant opportunity, when they have the documentation saying, what they have available and who's eligible, when's it due, the timing, all of those things, that's going to be in the request for application. And so when I read through a request for application, then I'm looking at what and who is eligible to apply, because not all grants are eligible for everybody. When is it due? Because I'm thinking, do I have time to put it together? When would I have to have it ready for? And if it's due on, say it was due on September 20th, hypothetically, I'm not going to want to submit on September 20th right at the last minute. You're really going to want to have it be ready ideally like the day before so that you can actually submit, and oftentimes you'll get some kind of response saying that they received it, because then, and so you have time to react to that. If you submit at the very last minute and they didn't receive it, then you have problems, right? Or if your computer crashes, your power goes out, there's all sorts of things that can happen. And so it's best to kind of give yourself a window there. And then I'm looking for the purpose of the grant. Overall, what does the grant want to accomplish? And then they should have a list of things that you need in order to be able to apply for the grant. And so we're going to switch over, and I'm going to share my screen and show you for the food security grant in Utah. So you should be seeing my screen now. And so here's the Utah Food Security Grant. And normally it would come in here at the top of the page, and I don't know why mine's off to the side. But so here's the Utah Food Security Grant. As you scroll down, we have the grant overview, and this is closed, so it's just a good example, but it gives you some background information. $1 million is available. It's the purpose of this grant. Let me see if I can get, this one's better. Let's see. There we go. Okay, I don't know why it was messing up there. Okay, so I realize this is a little bit small, but it gives us the background. And then as I'm looking for this, it says the purpose of this program is to address Utah's severe infrastructure shortfalls to increase the local processing capacity of Utah grown agriculture products and increase consumer access to locally produced food. So since that's the purpose of the overall funding, then if I'm applying, I want to, in my application, let them know that I'm addressing that purpose. And I also want to think about that purpose and what would be included in it and how that fits within my current business plan. Does this help enhance it? And so in order to do that, am I selling products in Utah? Am I processing food products in Utah? Am I using locally grown products that are grown in Utah? So in order to meet this purpose, I would have to have all of that stuff in place. The grant information. So individual awards will be capped at 200,000. 50% of the funds will be for meat and poultry processing. 20,000 will be held for micro grants of 5,000 or less. So I can apply for up to 200,000, or I could apply for a smaller amount, and they're going to actually identify some of these awards that just will go to small amounts. And then there's a cost match, which means part of the funds that I would need, I need to show how I'm going to use some of the funds for my business or somewhere else to match up with the grant funds if I receive them. And then eligibility requirements. So who's eligible, the eligible expenses, coolers and freezers, portion cutters, processing equipment, and there's some other stuff here. And the important dates. So this one, applications were open on May 1st. They close on June 8th. So I would see the information on how I need to put the application together by May 1st. I would have to have it submitted by June 8th. And then there's a review period, and the announcements will be announced late July. So that kind of gives me the timeline of that. And then the contracts will also be signed and completed by the end of July. And the project start day will be in July. So, and then the Q&A periods are question and answer sessions. So if I'm going to apply for this, then I probably want to attend those and find out about that. They have some other documents here, and they have some successes, so I can kind of see what people have done in the past. But right here, Utah Food Security Grant request for applications. And so if I click on that, I get to here. And so that's the RFA that we talk about, or the request for applications. And so this is actually something that you could download. Normally, if I was really serious about this, I would probably actually download this one and print it off. And then I would get some highlighters out and some pens, and as I go through, actually make a bunch of comments on here and highlight different things as I go through. But again, and I'm going through reading for stuff. So this one's due June 8th. Here's a contact if I have questions, the purpose. And like I said, it's really important to kind of look at the purpose of what's going on. So it covers these expenses, the eligibility. So I'm going to find out about my eligibility. Some ineligible things. So it's not going to cover salaries or fringe. It's not going to cover research for this one. The funding amounts were the same as I already went over. The timeline, we already kind of went over to that. But as we come down here, it says how to apply. And so this is one where I really want to pay attention, because this is what I'm going to particularly need to put together. So I got to have a title, the percent of my ingredients that are grown or raised in Utah, the primary agriculture sector that I'm in, how much grant funding I'm requesting. If I'm listing more things, but list them in the order of the priority of facility upgrades or equipment you plan to purchase, the cost for each item. And so this, as I'm looking at this, if it's the cost for each item, I need to have costed out any facility upgrades or equipment that I want to put in as a plan to purchase in this grant. So I might need to have some quotes for that, or something else that documents what it's going to cost. If things are conditional upon a purchase for something else, realistically, how quickly can these upgrades be done? How will your proposal impact the overall food supply chain in Utah? And describe your processing capacity, describe the sources. So you can kind of just see going through here what you're going to need to actually write up. Describe your current business plan. And then this is the review process. So this is what the reviewers are going to be looking for. So I want to kind of make notes of those types of things. So as I'm writing up all of these things that's required to submit, I also want to think about this as I'm putting those question answers together. And then the rating criteria, so this is how they're applying points. I want to look at this too, because I'm going to be more successful if I get more of these points. And so I'm always interested in what the points are. And then, so this one is really, it mostly just hits on the information that I'm looking for when I read through an RFA. This one's fairly short. I think it's like 4 or 5 pages, but several of them are going to be a lot longer. And especially some of the federal ones, you may have a lot more other forms and documentation that you'll need to submit. And so just kind of be aware of that. And we can go back to the slide set. And then, so here's, so once I have that information and I've kind of seen that, I've got kind of my basics there, we have to put together what I call kind of sketching out what I want to do. And in the next presentation, they're going to go a bit more into actually writing up and answering those questions. But first of all, I want to just kind of sketch out what I want to do, kind of back of the envelope type stuff. So what's my general plan? What am I going to do? So in the one that I just showed you, I'm going to probably buy some equipment. You know what I mean? What am I going to do? And then why is this a good idea? So just some notes. So this isn't like writing up everything, but just kind of jot down a few notes like, why do I want to do this? And does it follow? And then does whatever I want to do, does it follow that overall goal of the program? Is it going to increase the processing capacity of food grown in Utah being processed in Utah to sell to Utah people? So does it fulfill that overall goal? Who's going to work on it? Is this going to be my existing employees? Am I going to need a new hire? This particular grant wasn't going to cover salaries and benefits. And so does this fit in? How long is it going to take to do it? And then what's going to be the outcome? So how is it going to increase my sales of products or my processing capacity? What's really kind of, those are just kind of, and again, at this stage, I'm just kind of sketching out those answers. So they're not set in stone. I'm just kind of sketching them out and getting an idea of what am I going to do? And as I go through, I might also be taking some notes off to the side about, is there stuff that I still got to decide? Is there stuff that I've got to check into? And so just make yourself kind of a to-do list with some of that information. So next slide, please. So as I just started talking about, that list is really what information do you need to find? And so if I'm going to buy some equipment, I might need to get quotes for that and find out where it would be available. How quick can they get it to me if I am successful, you know, and I can order it, say in August? How quick would they get it to me? What else might I need to do to get that installed and used? You know what I mean? Do I need to get quotes for that and include that cost? When do I have to have everything ready? And so remembering that deadline for submitting the grant, what's it going to cost? You know, so not just in terms of what you might be applying for through the grant, but just in general, everything that might be needed for that. And then what's going to be, what might keep this from being successful for my business as successful for the grant reporting? And so I'm going to kind of think through what might be the downfalls, what might be the pitfalls that I might have to go, and do I have ways to compensate for those? Are some of them beyond my control? Do I need to just be aware of them? I want to go in this as much with eyes wide open as I can. And will this fit in with what my business is capable of and should be doing? So I've seen situations where people applied for and were successful for funding for their grant, but then they were spending so much time working on that grant and doing what the grant wanted, they kind of forgot about what their business should be doing. And then once the grant period was over, their business wasn't really successful because everything had been put into kind of fulfilling the grant without really thinking, how am I creating a solid business that can be viable now and in the future? And how can I use the grant proceeds to put stuff in place that is a stepping stone through that process? And then the time frame. The grant's going to have the time frame of when funds are available, when you have to get it done by, and then when you have to have outcomes that you're reporting those impacts and outcomes. And so I want to really kind of be as I'm putting my sketch together, be aware of that timeline and anything that I need to. Again, is it realistic? And is it going to happen during some periods of time where my business is already stretched to capacity because it's the busiest times of the year? And is that going to work for me or not? Because if it's, so my sister has a garden center in Utah, and their biggest sales period is from sometime in April to the beginning of June. So May is really their biggest sales month of the year. If they got a grant to put some infrastructure in place and it had to be done during that end of April, May period, that wouldn't be realistic for them because that would be at the cost of trying to use all their employees that are stretched to capacity during that 6-week period when they're bringing in a good chunk of their annual sales. And so the timing wouldn't fit. Could they do it before then? Could they do it after then? You know what I mean? They could look at that, but to really kind of, you have to think about if this time frame works for me. Next slide, please. So then you're going into the proposal. So, and as you're putting the proposal together, this is really kind of my lessons learned, because as I've gone through and been a reviewer on grants, also seen like, applied for my own grants, done other ones. There's things that I feel like have lessons that I've learned over the years. And if other people have comments, feel free to, again, put those in the chat. But as part of the proposal, one of the biggest things that I've done that's gotten me in trouble over the years is promising more than can be done. It's easy to get really excited as you're starting to think about the grant and what can be, and well, if and this goes right and this goes right, we could do this and we could do this and we could do this. And so it's good to be excited, but then take a step back and say, is this really realistic for me to actually get done? You know what I mean? So make sure that you're comfortable with what you're promising. And then another thing that I've really noticed, especially from the reviewer side, is make it easy for a reviewer to know how to score your application. So as we went through that request for application for the food security grant, they had that area where I was talking about the points. So look there at those points, and somewhere in your application, make it really easy to find the answers on how they can award those points to you. So use bold paragraph headings. You know what I mean? Spell things out. The easier you can make it for people to find that, the better off you are. And then once I have kind of that together, I want to look and maybe even have somebody else, read through and see what their take is on this. But does everything fit together? Because you're really kind of putting pieces of the puzzle together as we have the who's going to do it and what's going to be purchased and when we're going to put it in place and what we're going to get out of it and all of those things. And so you're putting a puzzle together. And I want to make sure that everything fits, everything matches. It feels like a cohesive whole. Because if we talk about needing all of these other things and my costs are really just a small part of that, then as a reviewer, I'm going to wonder, well, if these outcomes are based upon doing all of these things and what you've put in the grant is only this part, do you have the capacity to do all of these things? Are you going to do them in the time frame in order to get the outcomes and impacts that you're talking about? So make that fit together. Or if I'm asking for a lot of stuff in my costs, but it's not linked to the need and it's not linked to the outcomes, why is it included in there? So why are we paying for this when it's not part of any of this other stuff? So make sure that those things just feel like they fit together, like they're a cohesive whole. Do your impacts feel like they're coming from the costs and the outcomes? You know what I mean? Or do they feel like they're just kind of like, where did you find those? How is that related to this? So again, just make those pieces fit together. Realities, grants are not guaranteed. The advantage of grants is that when you receive a grant, you don't have to pay the funds back. You may have to have matching funds, which is in the case of the example that I used, where part of it's not going to cover all of the cost of the items, only a portion of them. And so you don't have to pay a grant back, but the reality is it's not guaranteed. You could put a lot of time, and I have in the past, in putting a grant application together. You could wait, sometimes it's several months for that review period to go on. And so you could wait several months. They only open it like once every year. And so if you weren't successful the first year, it could be another year or so before you can actually apply again. And best case scenario, it could be a couple of years, 18 months sometimes before you would get funding. And so they're not guaranteed. You can put time in them. You're limited to what the grant wants you to do. So sometimes it's really better to get loans or other funding that you pay back, but it fits your time frame and it fits what your business should be doing. And you probably find out whether you can get the loan or not in a more timely manner than most of the grants that I'm aware of. So just think through that because, like I said, sometimes grants are not the answer. Grants also come with requirements, and so need to know that you're fulfilling the requirements of the grant. So think about the documentation that you're going to need after you receive the grant. So you've got to be able to keep track of your expenses in order to invoice the grant. You've got to document the outcomes that you're getting from the grant. How are you going to document that? Can you keep track of that separate from the rest of your business records? You're also going to have to document your success. And so how can I document that? In the case of the food security grant, is probably looking at the sales increases. So I need to know the sales before and after. I need to keep track of invoices for the equipment that I'm purchasing under the grant. I've got to document that I used the equipment for something, you know what I mean, and what that did. I've also probably got to document my purchase of agriculture products that were grown in Utah that I'm using to process those things. So just think through the documentation that you might need. And then again, think through, will fulfilling this grant keep you from other activities? And so I use the example of the garden center, but think about some of your farms that you might have. What are the really times that you're harvesting or planting or something? There's those time periods that really make sense to work on some of these other projects, but then there's time periods that don't make sense to work on those projects. So really kind of think, if I'm successful, think through what is this going to do to my capacity for, me and any employees that I have, you know what I mean? So just kind of think through those realities. You're always happier and it's a better experience if you go in with that mindset of, I've really kind of thought this through. And there's been grants that I wrote that I was excited about at the time, but then once I got into them, I wished I never would have got them. I wish that I hadn't applied for them because they kept me from doing so many other things and they were just so involved. And if I would have taken a step back and really kind of thought about it, I probably wouldn't have applied for some of those over the years. So just keep that in mind as you go through. So next slide. Grants are taxable. So proceeds from grants are taxable unless there's a specific statute. So some type of a law or code or something that's passed that exempts that particular program from taxation. There's very, very, very few grant programs that have a tax exemption, and I'm not even thinking of one right now. So there can be a state law that exempts it from state taxes, but not the federal taxes. There can be a federal statute that exempts it from federal taxes, but it may still be taxable at the state level. And then some of them, it may exempt it from, they may be exempted both at the state and federal level. So just keep that in mind. However, and we go to the next slide, it often is not a problem because the net effect on your taxes really depends. But a lot of times what the funds are used for, the grant is income, but what the funds are used for is an expense or a deduction. And so when you take that, we add the proceeds from the grant, but we deduct what we used them to buy. And so the net effect is zero. And that's what you often have. So if the grant is for items that would be deductible as expenses, what you're using the funds to purchase, then there wouldn't be a tax effect. There may be some issues of timing. So if the funds are used, say in 2025, but you don't get the proceeds to reimburse you back for those until 2026, then you may have the deduction in 2025, which would lower your taxes, but the proceeds in 2026, which may increase your taxes depending on what you're doing. And so those timing issues may, if you're splitting across years, however, you still may have other things that are going on within your operation that you can use some tax management to kind of mitigate the effects of those. And so it may or may not actually be an issue, but it's just something to be aware of as you go through. Next slide. Oh, and I didn't realize how late I'm going. Sorry, I went too slow. Okay, so tax management, work with a tax professional. There's some tax management tools. I'll show you a resource that you can get into this. So let's go to the next slide. And then this is a resource, so ruraltax.org. It's going to have an article on grants. It's also going to have a link in that article to a webinar that I did on grants. And so that'll tell you everything you want to know about grants and taxes. So let's go to the next slide. And then these are some of the other resources that I'm available. We have a food biz website at Extension here in USU. The Urban and Small Farms recordings from the conferences that I've done for the last, since 2021, we've done those. And so they're YouTube recordings. Some of those are on grants and other programs. And then Fundamental Resources for Micro Entrepreneurs is on that site. And it's has some stuff to kind of sketch out a business plan before you get to, so it's just a more simple, accessible way to start to begin the process. So sorry for taking so long. I really did not realize how long it was taking. So I think we might still have some time at the end for some questions. I'd be happy to stay on and answer those, or if there are ones I can answer, I'll look for them in the chat and try to answer those. But thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. We'll hand it over to Sharon Check. Thank you for being here, Sharon.
There we go. Can everyone hear me and can everyone see?
Perfect.
Got it there. Okay, great. Okay, well, hello, everyone. I am excited to be here today and to follow up that amazing presentation with a lot of incredible wisdom. And the piece that I am going to be breaking down is sort of after you find that grant that you know that you want, and you know is a great fit for your business. I'm also going to be using interchangeably business and organization. So a lot of the folks that I work with in the Los Angeles area happen to be structured as nonprofits that are within this industry as well. So this goes for businesses, organizations, everyone in the local food and farming world who may be applying for grants. All right. Hang on one second. There we go. So first, just a really quick overview. We're going to do a quick introduction, and then what I'm really going to be focusing on is demystifying the components of a grant. So Ruby touched on a lot of those and a lot of the different pieces there. Every RFA is going to be structured a little bit differently. And so this is kind of a big overview of all of the different pieces that you might see in an RFA or in a grant application, and to think kind of strategically about what are they really asking for and why are they asking it, and how to prepare for sort of any different type of application. So the first question, and Ethan's going to help me out here and do a little poll, is who here has written a grant before? I'm just going to take just a minute and see. This is fun in real time. Okay, so it seems to have evened out a little bit. It looks like we are right about at the 60-40 level of folks who have written a grant before and folks who have not written a grant before. So that's great. That's just where we want it, right? We have folks that have some experience, but a lot of folks that have not done that before. So I guess, do I share results? Let's see. Okay. Great. So the next thing that I was wondering if we could do is to have folks just jump in the chat and write one word that the first word that comes up when you think about grant writing. And I'm actually, because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not able to see the chat right now. So I don't know if Ethan or Tracy wants to just call some of those out.
We're seeing cumbersome, overwhelming, tedious twice. Someone
Tedious.
chat GPT. articulation, hard time, confusing, another tedious,
Wow.
attention to
Okay.
detailed data, all over the place, confusing.
Yeah. Great, because people love writing great. People love this stuff. It's so it's so fun. So I think this gives us the idea this is not always the process that everyone is looking forward to. So hopefully this can be a little bit of a cheat sheet or a go-to resource when you're just, trying to get motivated to jump into that grant writing. So as Ruby mentioned in the previous presentation, also always start with, sometimes you'll hear the term RFP, that's just request for proposals. Sometimes you're going to hear the term RFA, request for applications. Pretty much every grant has one of these things, and it's basically your go-to guiding document for the grant that has all of the really important information about everything that you're going to need, including things that she covered, like eligibility. Is it even worth trying to apply for this grant? Is it the right grant for your organization? But next, because this is a food systems group, and really thinking about grants sort of like a food system, in the sense that all of the components of a grant are also interrelated, sort of like all the different pieces of a food system are interrelated. And I think in the previous presentation, we heard a lot about that too. So really emphasizing this idea of it's about having the puzzle pieces reference each other and fit together well. So you want to make sure that your budget is referencing your narrative. And we're just going to dive into those different pieces now as well. So the first thing here is the problem statement. There's always usually going to be some version of this in pretty much every grant. So what is a problem statement and why is it included in a request for proposals? So sometimes it's called a statement of need, and it's always going to answer the question, what is the problem that your project will solve, or what need will it address? And this can be, within your business, and sometimes it's broader and it's something broader within the community. So this is often considered the most important part of a proposal because it sets the stage for basically everything else that you're going to say within your proposal. It describes the problem, it describes who's impacted, and it also has the causes, and it backs up these claims with data and statistics and other research. It often describes how this need or issue has implications beyond the immediate community so that solutions can be replicated. So for example, a lot of the time, a funder doesn't want to see a problem solved just for a single business, but wants to really address a larger systemic problem. And so wants to see something that could potentially be replicated. And so this is your opportunity to describe why your proposal and your project is having an impact on this larger issue. And then sometimes you'll also get RFAs that are for something really specific, like the one that was shared in the previous presentation, that is specifically geared toward a food or farm business and will ask more direct questions. But a lot of the time you're going to see this of really kind of setting the stage for the whole thing and having a problem statement. So these are just a few tips for the problem statement. It should always tell a story. So this is your opportunity to really bring the reviewer in, right? So to tell that story and paint the picture of the situation. You can provide a larger context, but still be focused enough that your proposal can address it in a meaningful way. So if you're just kind of writing about a big problem, but not bringing it back down to earth of how is what you're about to say and what you're about to propose going to address that problem. So you want to make sure that you're able to ground it within the problem statement. You also want to make sure that it's backed up with credible local and national statistics, along with any anecdotal information. This can be storytelling from within your community. And you also want to make sure that it's framed in terms of the needs of those impacted instead of the needs of your business or organization, and demonstrate the urgency of the situation. So sometimes basically what you don't want to say for the problem statement is just something that's like, well, my business or organization needs money, so we want to grant because we are running out of funding. You want to have it address the larger issues and bring in that bigger context of supporting farms, local food systems, etc., beyond just kind of the immediate needs of your organization. You want to describe the why. So the next thing is the goals and objectives. So what is it and why? Goals state what you want your project to achieve and answers the question, what is your project going to accomplish? And then the objectives, along with sometimes you'll hear the term outcomes as well, state measurable results that the project hopes to accomplish in terms of achieving these goals. So some tips for goals and objectives. They should always directly address the issue described in your problem statement. So these are these puzzle pieces coming together again, right? So make sure that your goals address your problem statement, reflect the desired long-term achievements of the project, and specify who will benefit. Align with the goals and priorities of the funder or the RFA. So this is back to that problem statement in the RFA, in the example RFA that we looked at. Making sure that your goals are aligned with the larger goals of the grant. And then the objectives should support the goals and measure the progress toward achieving them. And they should also be SMART. So that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Okay, next is the activity timeline. So one thing that I want to point out with this particularly is that in grants in general, they typically ask questions in a certain order. And the order that they ask questions is often the order that it's easiest if you're a reviewer to read them in. But you, as someone writing a grant, you don't have to go in that order. You can kind of do what makes the most sense for you. A lot of the time, if I sort of know what I'm trying to do with a grant and how to approach the project, I'll typically start with the activity timeline. And I'll tell you why in just a second. So sometimes this can be a part of a section of the grant called the approach, and sometimes it's called a work plan. But an activity timeline lets the funder know that you have a plan for how you're going to achieve all of your goals and objectives. And in general, it's going to always include what you will do, who's responsible, and when you will do it. And so I find that this can be the most useful sort of touchstone as you're going through the entire grant writing process to remind you and help you connect all of those puzzle pieces. Because you go back to this and you say, right, this is what I'm going to do. This is when I'm going to do it. This is who's going to do it. Is it new staff? Is it existing staff? Is it someone else? And really can kind of keep that whole process on track. So a few tips is be thoughtful and detailed. This is your roadmap. And also, instead of looking at this just as sort of another annoying piece of the grant or an exercise, this can actually be a tool, not just for the grant writing, but also if you're successful and you get the grant, you can look at this and this can be your map throughout the entire process. So you always want to include who, what, and when to make sure that your plan is clear. Yeah. And then we'll move on to the organization and support. So why do they include this section? This is mainly because funders want to be sure that the grant recipient has the capacity to carry out the project and that there's also community buy-in to support it. So they typically ask for an organization or business description, and you can think about this as a resume for your business. Sometimes this can be a business plan, or there could be an opportunity for that, but I would always follow instructions and don't ever just submit a business plan if they're asking for an organizational description, though you can reference it. Then a lot of grants will also ask you for letters of support. Sometimes they're called letters of commitment, and they'll specify whether that's who needs to provide these. So whether that's somebody who's directly involved in the project, or sometimes it's somebody who's within the industry but not involved in the project. So these could be for a farm and food business. This might be a farmer's market manager. It could be an existing customer. It could be a prospective customer who, if you got this grant and were able to scale up your business, they would be a customer. And so they can basically write that they're committing to your project and committing to your grant. It could be a nonprofit partner or an other people or groups with a stake in the project. And the letters always want to spell out their role and their commitments and how they're going to help to ensure that the project is successful. So a few tips for your describing your organization and letters of support. Your org description should show that your organization is a good fit for the grant and your team is qualified. Sometimes they'll ask you for actual resumes of key staff to make sure that that your staff is qualified. And then letters of support should demonstrate that your partners and your community are truly invested in the project. And you also can use them to emphasize different aspects of the project. So they can speak to different strengths that you have to really paint a full picture. The other tip is always collect these as early in the process as you can. Typically, letters of support, they're your priority, but they may not be your partners or your customers' priority. So they might not really have the motivation to hustle to get them turned around. So you want to give them as much time as possible, give them as much information as possible about it too, and be very clear about what you need from them and when you need it by, so that you have plenty of time in case things go wrong, because this is one of those things that is out of your control, but you really need that support to complete the application. Okay, budget. So the budget is a plan for your financial operations, and there's always going to be proposed revenue and expenditures over the grant period. So most funders also require a budget narrative. This is just text that's describing what's in your budget. Sometimes it's in the same form, so you'll have basically a spreadsheet and a section to describe each line item in the spreadsheet. And it explains how you've determined what these costs are and that they're realistic. So a couple of tips for the budget is always check the allowable costs. Make sure that anything that is reflected in your budget is on the list of allowable costs. Carefully think through all of your expenses, and then if you already have a business plan, start with that. You probably don't need to start from scratch. You've probably looked into a lot of these things and have a lot to work with already. And then always, even if you have a business plan, and if there's an attachment allowed, don't just submit the business plan. This can drive reviewers kind of crazy because they're going to want to see something that's in the template that's provided. So you really need to do that extra work in order to provide that template and make it easy for the reviewer to review it. Even if it's just the most perfect business plan, you still want to put it into whatever template they ask for, and that's because it's just makes it a lot easier for the reviewers to interpret the information and to read it. Okay, so then program sustainability is kind of the next piece here. Is funders want to know that the program is not solely dependent on their funding and that you have a plan to sustain the program once it ends. So most applications ask for a sustainability plan, and that's going to demonstrate that you have diversified funding streams, that you will develop other funding streams over the course of the grant, or that you have another plan for how to sustain the project. I know there was a note in the chat that said like the best grant advice is about knowing that your business will be able to exist without the grant. And that's something that funders want to see too. They typically don't want to see that you are overly relying, especially if it's a small grant, just on that grant. They want to see that there's a plan to sustain without the grant and to sustain beyond the grant, even if the grant is supporting your business or organization to get to the next level. So a few tips for the program sustainability section. Is that your sustainability plan should demonstrate, as I mentioned, that you have diversified funding, that you also have ongoing community buy-in and support. And so this can also, back to those puzzle pieces, be referenced in your letters of commitment. That's something that you can demonstrate that support and that buy-in from folks outside of your immediate business or organization. And then the next thing I'm going to talk about is evaluation. So what is evaluation and why? Sometimes you'll hear the grant will ask not so much about evaluation, but will mention impact. So that's something where okay, this is about measuring the impact that your program is having. It's how you measure the success and the impact. And there are different methods and types of evaluation, but most require some type of indicator to measure your performance. So this could be something like the number of new customers, an increase in sales. What's going to happen? What's going to be different once you receive this grant funding? So why are these important? Funders require this because they want to know in real terms what impact their funding is having. And they want to know what about this larger systemic problem has changed, or what about the purpose of the grant is changed due to this grant funding. So beyond this, I think sometimes this can seem like something that is sort of daunting or something that's just for the funder. But I would encourage everyone to look at this as something that can actually be really helpful to you, because this information and this data that you're gathering can help you know if your project is on track or if something needs to be adjusted. And it can also help you either, just on this grant or your organization or your business in general to secure future funding when you have this level of documentation and impact. So the other piece is that when you track something that seems really small, you're just tracking sales of a certain product or something that doesn't seem that big in the moment, it can really add up to a big impact over time if you're measuring it consistently and you have that system in place. So I would also encourage you to think about how you want to track success over time outside of just one grant, and see if you can plug it into a larger arc in order to measure success that's beyond the scope of just one single grant, and lining up some of these indicators either across multiple grants or programs or your business in general. So a few tips for the evaluation piece is think about what metrics or indicators have the potential to capture the impact of your work. So what are you doing, and what would be the best indicator that would show what you're doing and show your progress? So maybe that's the number of new products that you are offering due to this grant funding. Maybe it's increased production. Maybe it's the number of new customers, increase in annual sales. Some grants will specify what they're looking for this, but this is also an opportunity to really be thinking about how would you measure your own progress and what would be meaningful for you and for your business. So making sure that you're clear about what will be measured and how it will be measured. And also thinking about doing these measurements not just at the end of the grant, but doing it throughout the grant. Make sure that this is reflected in a part of your activity timeline, because then if something needs to be changed. It's less stressful to do it in these sort of small pieces as you go, but also it can actually be useful to you. Instead of just reporting to the funder, you can get this information as you go and be able to integrate that and to inform your decision making as you go. Oops, sorry, this didn't work on my end. So overall, just a few final tips here is start early, always get buy-in and develop a concept ahead of time. I think this was also mentioned in the previous presentation. Don't let the grant drive the direction of your business. Know the direction of your business and plug the grant into that. Always check the eligibility before you put too much work in, because what you don't want to do is get really invested in the grant, write half of it, double check that eligibility section and realize, oops, we actually can't apply for this grant. This is just for nonprofits and we're a business, so this isn't going to work, or vice versa, right? Always follow the application instructions carefully. I use this example of, making sure you're using any templates that are provided, but always do that because it's mostly because it's going to make it easier for the reviewers to review it, and they might disqualify you if you don't. Use simple language, spell out any acronyms, proofread. Again, it's all to make it easier and clearer for reviewers to understand what you're asking. And also don't assume that the reviewers know anything about your project. Even if it's out there, you think that everyone knows about something, always describe it and explain anything in your application as though someone's coming in with zero knowledge about your project or your application. Okay. So I know we are over time. So Ethan and Tracy, I'll look to you to see if we still have any time for an activity. And if not, this could be something that you do as a little homework exercise on your own, unless you think we have time to do it to extend.
Sharon, thank you so much. Here's what we're going to do. We'll go ahead and close out and thank folks for their time. And then if people want to hang around and ask a few questions and go through the activity, we can add on an extra 10 minutes. Does that sound okay? So Ethan is going to just bring up our QR code so that folks can hop on there. They can join our newsletter, stay engaged with our center. We hope to have funding opportunities in the future. We want to continue to engage with you and want to say thank you so much for your time. Wish you the very best in the rest of your day. Take care. And with that closure, Ethan, I will ask you to go ahead and stop record.